thank you all for coming. I'm just so grateful to be able to be here. Grateful to the people who make it possible, who are Wyatt and Barbara and the marvelous staff and Tennessee and all our students, faculty. It's just so lovely. You know, the other day I was sitting at breakfast and Lillian Manning was sitting there, and she all of a sudden says, she opens up her arms and she says, "This is my family." So I sort of feel like that. This is my family. And along another note, so many of the students here are my grand students. I just love that, you know, students of my students, and you know, the family keeps growing. So thank you all. I'm delighted to be here. Let's see. I'm going to start with a poem that, several of these poems I've not read very often. This is based on a poem of Zbigniew Herbert's, and I was reminded of it when I was talking with Gerard, one of my students, who also wrote a poem inspired by this same Zbigniew Herbert poem. It's called Out for a Walk. My soul took itself out for a walk the other day. It hasn't yet returned, and I'm slightly concerned. It used to say it always wanted to travel the world. It used to say it couldn't help it if its heart was larger than the room in which we lived. It used to say it's terrible how it longed to converse with other flesh. So what should I do? Should I allow myself the rich, dark honey of a jealous rage? Should I breathe slowly and count to 10,000 several hundred times? Should I harrow the black soil of my body for clues? Perhaps I'll just sit quietly and swing my foot. Perhaps I'll just listen to this fatal thudding in my chest. Listening to what Morris was saying this morning about the dynamics of landscape and literature was so very interesting, and I find myself inspired by landscape often more than anything else. And so I'll read three Turkish landscape poems. I lived for 2 years in Turkey, and I just noticed when I was checking over the poems that every one of these involves climbing a mountain. I don't know why. This first one, the mountain is Karadağ in the eastern section of Turkey. The eastern area of Turkey is alpine. It's very beautiful. There are these enormous, tall mountains, snow-covered. There are chalets up there. And the poem is called Karagöl, which means black lake. We have climbed all day to this black eye, black lake we picnic by. In the cold light, we admire the high scenery, the frozen pony, the half-eaten greens. I am harder than I know, and my heart is blacker. The water is silent and exact. The golden child we have hauled up with us plays with a crazy chicken in the green grass. The sun throws down an occasional spear. My soul is green and as ice and as severe. There is joy, though, in the coldness. It streams from the earth. It bowls down the mountain in bright, exuberant ribbons, excessively bristling with wayward propositions, a constant and variable slosh in the ears. There is joy in the clarity that distance wears, like an evening gown, in this unearthly altitude, whose every reflection is natural and cruel, whose fine air we relinquish in blue necessity, stepping carefully the hard line of descent. Termessos is on top of a mountain in southern Turkey. It is a very ancient city that has been, it's a ruin now. It was destroyed by many centuries of earthquakes, but several of the buildings are still standing. It was built using the ashlar block construction method, which means you have to engineer these blocks of stone so very carefully. You just pile them one on top of another, and they need no mortar whatsoever. It's extraordinary to think that people managed to do this centuries and centuries and centuries ago. It's an amazing place. It's so high up that Alexander the Great decided not to bother with it when he mowed through the neighborhood. Termessos. From ashlar blocks cool to the hand, from the passionately accurate spaces between them, from cisterns brimming with desiccated comment, from the heard but invisible snake in the brush, rise the word walls of a ruined city. Wait, they seem to be saying, wait. They have waited through mountainous declensions of time, through bronze panels of sunlight that transfigure the fall, and lisping snows and the engorgements of spring. Wait, they say, in the dialect of stones that converses with surge and the moving earth. There is work to be done. There are cores to mine. There is a future here of geometrical purity if you just have time to analyze the lines. Wait, they repeat, and one navigates a cleft with the feet and the heart and the desire to believe in this stone-born imperative and its constellations of lichen that testify there is no less diminishing, there is only the organic work of translation. Another mountain in Turkey. This one is called Mount Olympus. It's not the one in Greece, obviously. What one does in Mount Olympus is to here it is. You climb up at night. This is the site, people believe, of the birth of the myth of Chimera, which is this flying monster up in the sky that is half lion and half serpent, and it breathes fire. And the reason for that is once you climb up the mountain, you will encounter an area where little tiny flames of fueled by methane gas that has been seeping out of the mountain for centuries have been burning for centuries. Some are this high. The tallest are this high, but it's this area probably about as big as this room with all these little fires. And you can imagine that the sailors in the Mediterranean, 3,000 years ago were sailing by and there's fire in the sky. It must have been quite something. So I write about the Chimera, that's the title of the poem, and I speak towards the end of Bellerophon, who was the great hero who eventually was able to vanquish the beast with the help of Pegasus, the flying horse. Chimera. So what you do is you go to this area and then you climb up at night because you want to be able to see the fires more clearly. The beastly hot flesh of the beach's nude white sand sears the feet even in the dark. The waves a quiet lace ornament on hissing water. From here we climb up the mountain's flank. It's hairless and strange and arid. Pebbles chuckle down. The trail is thin. My flashlight flashes and ranges like a wild white chicken. No moon, hot darkness radiating down. Aqueous lightnings prick at the backs of the eyes. Here is the odor of seeping gases. Here is the face of the beast, small fires in the ground. Little blue tongues, cold to the eye, lap formally at the night's profile. I've stalked my way here to this mythical minute on the creature's lip, down a metaphorical path whose wobbly complex of wrong destructive pieces and powerful beauties resembles this old monster grappled up by sailors heaving on the ragged, growling breast of an ancient sea. And now here I am, scrambling over the stone face, peering down into the hot compound eyes and wondering from the outskirts of the fractured ground if a tangle with the handsome Bellerophon on his magical steed with the great and poetic wings isn't just what I really need. Okay, another landscape. I inherited a beautiful old limestone house built in 1874 in central Kansas when my mother died. It was hers. She gave it to me. It's in the tiny town of Denmark, Kansas. My mother's family were Danish, and they settled the town. There's a tiny little limestone church, Lutheran church, and in it hangs a ship, a seagoing vessel, a model of a seagoing vessel, which was done in homage to the custom of Denmark, which, of course, is a seafaring nation. And I've never been there, but I've been told that if you travel around, all the churches in Denmark have these ships hanging from the rafters that are carved and offered to the churches by in thanks and in praise and in hopes for luck. The Danish term for this is kirkeskibe, which means the ship in the church. Wind blows the wheat like water and seeps under the door and curls around the feet of the pews and stirs up some dust in the sunlight and dies in the nave. In this heart of many hearts, we know what it is to rest light as snow on a still night, and to dissolve on the tongue, on the body of an old, old love. And we know the prayer, the dust and the ashes, the darkened face of the prairie as it opens, as it does and does, to receive us. And all the small deaths in the evening, and the blackbirds blue and green and gold as oil, and as violet after a hard, hard rain. And the rolling shoulders of the hills, the stone graced so thinly with its hopeful mantle, so shallow, no trees, only grass and the bitter streams. And the ship hangs still in a quiet corner, offering up its burden of praise. We know it's the same old ship of fools, old worn, old fragile prairie schooner. The Combine. This poem is modeled directly on Elizabeth Bishop's The Moose. Through acres of wheat with heavy heads, fields of hay and oats, alfalfa, green and low, on one of the dirt roads that travels straight east and west, or north and south, curving seldom from these straightforward axes, over slowly rolling hills through an occasional pasture, over a few curling creeks crowded with trees, we're driving to a shower celebrating the engagement of a second cousin. The wind is blowing, the sun is shining. We called him Straight Pete Nelson, grandmother says, from the back seat of the car. We've passed his old homestead, and she's peering out the back window at the abandoned pile of dressed yellow limestone that once was a home. He'd stand at the ends of his rows and stare down each one as if his life depended on their being straight as blazes. Did you know, Aunt Thelma interrupts, that Emerald Nyquist has taken to drink? Oh my. The small amazement at a world not thoroughly correct. On the right, the isolated but well-maintained cemetery of the renegade mission devout, broken from the Lutheran body many years ago, a civil war of minor proportions. A handsome headstone guards the Damker plot, 2 large ones and 2 large markers and 4 small ones, all the children carried off by whooping cough in one unspeakable stroke. A single meadowlark sits and preens on a leaning post rock. On past fields littered with small square and big round bales of fodder. Yes, they say he locked his wife in the basement, then prayed for her resurrection. A pheasant trots across an unkempt plot. Here weeds prevail. We change direction at the Goldenrod elevator, a solitary metal structure hunkered down beside the railroad tracks. The complexion of the noonday fields is metallic, a weather-beaten grain glanced at by the sun. The motion of the wheat in high relief and golden as can be imagined is heady, oceanic. We fall silent, lulled by the roll of the land, the hum of the motor. Now, as we top a modest rise, we see a combine in a far field. Harvest has begun, and a single figure sits high as a lookout on his rust-colored machine, small and angular in the distance. Without veering from an imaginary line, he works his way slowly toward the center, guiding the stately vessel around the selvages of the field, felling wheat in a wide wake behind him. This one has nothing to do with landscape, but it's built on the names of cultivated roses. It's modeled after Wallace Stevens's Apostrophe to Vincentine. Does anybody know that poem? I took his rhyme scheme and his form and filled it in with the names of these cultivated rose varieties. Apostrophe to Beatrice. I fancied you incarnadine, from early flush to celestial garden. Your flesh glows like the tourmaline, your carpal charms, my scarlet melandine. I twirled for you, your eyes serene, your bruises too, and your blazing mane. Then, healing in your garden green, we carouseled, my ballerine. Caprice des dames, my darling flame, your cuisse de nymph have stormed my heaven and veiled my sight with sensual screen and draped the night, my crepe de chine. And then I knew your metaphors. Your Marschenland is round and blue. Your tristesse girdles miles and miles. Your heart is keen. I'll hold you long and warm and more. Bonne nuit, my lovely libertine. We're going to Rome now. I lived in Rome for 1 year. My husband at the time won the Rome Prize, and we had a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, with who I parked every morning with the nuns for the morning, so I could write. And so I would sit in my chair in our fabulous, shabby old apartment, and with my pencil and my dictionary and my books, and nothing came. Nothing at all. It was awful. And I sat there and I could not write. And after 3 months, I'm lying, I got 1 poem out of this. But after 3 months, I was thinking, this is really stupid. I need to go out and see Rome. So after that, I'm here. So I bought a copy of Georgina Masson. It's a guide to Rome, and I walked all through Rome with her, and it was quite a wonderful experience. One of the things I like to do, well, actually, so this one poem was written there, and the second one I'm going to write. They're both the same sort of poem. They're both irreverent poems about sacred spaces. So there are many sacred spaces in Rome, and I saw them all. This is an imaginary one. It's called Pungent Sauces, and I got the title from Dante, several of whose characters in the Inferno are boiling in some pungent sauces. Pungent Sauces. Fecund Regina, O queen of my lap, I'll build a tropic temple for you, a refulgent basilica with soaring apse and clear story windows. Will that do? Here's an architrave swelled with swaying forms, denoting the seasonable passage of time, and the watering down of all earthly devotions and their bitter fragrance in pantomime. The entablature will blaze in the gloom of night with aromatic figures in whose magical eyes the meaning of life will burn white on white, reflecting the braziers of paradise. Rosa Mystica mine, we shall figure you blessed in a tympanum fretted with fabulous beasts, chief among them a newt with erectile crest and a gaggle of pâté de foie gras geese. We shall feast on all feast days and give thanks to our host, in whose monstrance lie tickets to mediate bliss. May I savor your sauces and offer a toast to a clement and firm metamorphosis? Where is Santa Praxede? Santa Praxede, St. Praxed's Church, Does anybody know the fabulous Browning poem, "The Bishop Orders His Tomb" at St. Praxed's Church? It's just absolutely delicious. It's Santa Prassede. It's a Byzantine church of great beauty, and I bathed in its sensual gorgeousness often in Rome. Santa Prassede, Rome. Here is a story of a temporal sweetness in the watery light. These windows are small, the eyes frail, human organs. They are sinners in the presence of brilliant forms. The vault hangs full of faraway glory, while carnal tissue fills up space in the nave. O Byzantium and the swaying graces, such light comes in waves, and the tesserae wink like golden grains of sand. O Lord, they are full of love. The air is moist, and the man luminescent. His figure is large under the piers, and the blue of the heavens, the starlit parvis, and the cloudy stairs, as she drifts through the light to grasp his form through columns of black and oriental jasper. In the garden of paradise, the air feels green. Their hands sway like kelp, thin and helpless. O Lord, she says, let us not stop moving. He is heavy. His face is full like the moon. As the tide gathers them in, even the starfish are singing. Okay, enough with the landscape. How about? Bricolage is a poem about eye problems. When I was studying for my comprehensive exams for my PhD, I got up in the morning and I read all day long, and then had dinner and read into the evening. Did that for an entire semester, basically. And eventually I developed something called an optical migraine. Does anybody have that? It doesn't hurt. It's painless, but what happens is you see these like black and white snakes between your inside your eyeballs or something that just obscure your vision for a while. Your eyes feel a little weird, and then after half an hour it's all gone. But that happened often, so I thought I'd think about that condition. In the poem I refer to Leslie Blanch. Does anybody know who Leslie Blanch is? He wrote this incredibly purple prose novel called The Wilder Shores of Love. I think I read it. And in here is some sort of snarky sniping at a review that one of my colleagues got on his book of poems. The blurber said, "These are wise poems of rare lyrical attentiveness," and for some reason that really irked me. Bricolage. My eyes are on the blink again, so I stagger around the kitchen, pottering with the bric-a-brac and trying to see through these roiling and apparently imaginary chains that look like black and white DNA strands inside my eyeballs, and thinking, well, at least I'm not writing mournful, wise poems of rare lyrical attentiveness. When all of a sudden I think of you and your bedroom eyes. Romance is my life, I wish I could say, but I can't. Leslie Blanch has already said it. So I think I'll leave that one lay where Jesus flang it and focus and focus my fraying attention on the wilder shores of the cupboards and cleaning under the toaster, the sort of thing one can accomplish while deep blue pools expand and contract and obscure the immediate and present in one's range of vision. The great thing about seeing is its infinite variety and the fact that it can be managed under almost any condition, even in the dark. For instance, I can see you very clearly now, your long, tall frame, the shine of those little lights on the cool, wet pavement, the dark and tender neighborhood we inhabited for a time. Okay. Occasional readers up here have alluded to the distressing historical moment we are living through. And we did this before. Remember when George Bush was not elected twice, I was furious. I was filled with rage, and it was a productive rage. I wrote a great many political poems. I don't seem to be able to do that this time around. It seems bigger and much more overwhelming. But anyway, here are two of the poems that I wrote then that seem to be relevant today. An organized crime spree of the highest order. This just in, our apocalyptic nerve gas news analysis team reports the final dissolution of the Squeamish Party. The mercantile essence has reinvigorated the auction block and ratcheted up a free-for-all in our deeply pocketed hemi-demi heaven. Beyond the ever-efflorescent brass, an occasional lance gleams in the camps of the foolhardy who suspect necrosis in the ballot box is advanced. Yet the ship of state barges on in brilliant rays of tin largesse as we mine the metaphysics of the mall. An utterly gross thing. As principal conjurer of false relief, he traffics in bluff and swagger and sheds on occasion a single brass tear. The measure of larceny here is breathtakingly grand, built on blather beyond belief. Our body politic is out of joint, but Dr. Kmart will see us now, and once we've reached the federally designated turning point, we'll celebrate in gildered streets and golden groves with the election in the proverbial bag and random darkness fuming on the stove. These are much too polite for today's realities. I've read this poem here before, but many of you were not here before. So who knows what a geep is? Yes, a geep is an engineered creature built out of the genes that are joined of a goat and a sheep. Geep. I mentioned here my colleague Michael Hoffman, who brought the geep to my attention. And those of you who know Frost will recognize the wholesale theft from him at the end. Okay. Everybody should know, by the way, the fabulous essay, The Figure a Poem Makes. This is what I stole from. Geep. The music of the sleepy day was ravagingly dull until Michael reeled up a geep from the depths of his considerable intelligence. A geep, a wonky blend of goat and sheep. A medical medley, genetic fugue they call chimera, another wholly enthralling sound we found when Googling geep, whose enharmonic bleating in the end rings oh so sad. The photo on the screen reveals a downcast baby creature, neither here nor there, two bold and mordant sets of chromosomes whistling fortissimo through its patchwork hide, a botched-up map of silken hair and woolly yellow fur, its forlorn droopy ears a study in radical embarrassment. I feel profoundly sorry for this border folly, this lonely little instrument of the ever-expanding notion of what's possible, but then I see we're kin, the little geep and me. We're marginal ephemera intoning low, invisible messages at the edges of the known to who knows whom, the difference between us a matter of degree. The poet, of course, a hybrid creature of transport and remorse, an overreacher in semaphore who knows that gold sounds the gold in the ore, whose pleasure ground is linguistic welter that rides like ice on its own melting to paradise or to a stranger land we don't yet understand. Okay, here come the effing bird poems. Buckle your seatbelts. Birds are made mostly of air. They bear scant weight and many bright colors. Eschewing the freight of matrimony, they rarely mate for life. They lay their speckled eggs on stony cliffs, on sea wrack or bare sand, and in the grass. Glass, alas, often breaks their necks as they migrate at night or in the bright betrayals of sunlight. Snowy Owl. I wrote this poem very early on. In fact, it's in my first book. And I didn't even notice until just the other day, as I was preparing for this this reading. I didn't become a birder until just 10, 11 years ago, and then I became completely obsessed. But these are the first 3 poems in my first book: White Birds, Snowy Owl, Swan Lake. So it was foreordained, I guess. Snowy Owl. A woman who looked like a snowy owl knocked on my door last winter. A bunch of artificial violets was pinned to her gray woolen coat. She trudged through the snow in high heels sheathed in opaque plastic boots. Her smile was as bright as a blast furnace, and her eyes behind double thick glasses brimmed over with inspiration. "Do you," she began, "ever think about living forever?" "Sometimes," I replied, staring into her yellow eyes. She then reached in her purse and pulled out a mouse that swung from her gnarled and horny fingertips, dead. "The gift of eternal life is not for mice." "It is for us who know the beauty of death, the light in the blood as it falls to earth, who know too the good liquor of loss, blue terror in the fall from a great height, who know cruelty can be beautiful and love a poor relation in this fine world full of contradiction." After this, she smiled more brightly than ever, and with great gentleness and pride restored the dead mouse to her purse. "Do you have any questions?" she inquired. I thought for a moment and said, "Yes, are you partial to a gamey cassoulet? Perhaps I could persuade you to step in for dinner." She puffed out her chest and glared. The violets shivered. She then wheeled on a sharp heel and flew away. I'm not sure anybody really understands at the end of that poem. I'm inviting the snowy owl to be dinner. Okay. Blue. This poem is about a double-crested cormorant. And I learned something just a couple of years ago when I wrote this poem. Of course, in breeding season, the double-crested cormorants and many other wading birds, there are rings around their eyes that become like sapphires. They're absolutely gorgeous. But what I didn't know was that the inside, I actually saw this in one very rare moment. It was in the sunshine, the cormorant had its mouth open. The inside tissue of the entire mouth is a brilliant blue. Oh, blue. The great blue song of the earth is sung in all the best venues, treetop, marsh, desert, shore. And on this spring day in the wetlands where, under a late sun, we stand alone and in love with each other and the passing day, we watch a cormorant whose eye is ringed in blue diamonds, a shimmering lure, and we love this blue and this dark bird and this deepening sky that pinks and hums in the west. And then the bird opens his beak and flutters his throat, and the late afternoon light illuminates the inside tissue of his mouth, which is as blue as his ocular jewelry, as blue as the bluest ocean, as blue as the sky in all its depth, as blue as the back of the small and determined beetle who struggles to roll his enormous dung ball in his own breeding bid to enchant another small blue miracle. Okay, I will read a handful of new poems that have not yet been collected. This one, I'm going to have to offer a trigger alert. It's got filthy language in it, really, really bad words. So if you take exception, if you don't want to listen to that, it'll only take a minute. Just put your fingers in your ears, or if there are any children in the house, cover their ears. This is a sonnet called Bird Sonnet. It's a classical sonnet. I've got mostly iambic pentameter. I've got the perfect rhyme, the 14 lines. I've got the turn. Although the turn comes, I've got the sestet and the octave inversed, so the sestet comes first. Okay, Bird Sonnet. Sharp beak, a beady eye, a radiant song, little parables of light and feathers. I swear I could watch birds all day long. The doctor recommended I immerse my soul in songful stuff, but much of the time I contemplate a different sublime. The clueless, greedy fuckwad at the helm keeps on braying out his shitty pie hole. The witless fucking cocksplat overwhelms and filthifies the air. He can't control his douchebag self-regard. The lardass sits on his golden crapper and tweets the stupid schmuck. A rambling asshole fuck muppet cockwumble shit he smears all the goddamn day. He's cluster-fucked the nation, flaying all his micro-thoughts on ass-lick toadies, filthy, dickless thugs, the shitbag wankers stealing all we've got. Cheese sticks, shit stains, fuck sticks, dick bags, ugh. Oh my, sorry about that. That's all I have. I'm so sorry. You guys have to carry the torch now. Oh, man. Okay. The foot. The foot lives at the foot of the stairs, the mountain, the cross, the leg. Foot soldiers march till they're footsore, then rest their feet on footstools. Footnotes are written on poems written in feet. The fog comes in on little cat feet. Footlockers filled with footballs, the game's afoot. Footmen and footpads, hot-footed, foot first. Colt's foot, crake feet, drake's feet, craw foot. Bigfoot walks around barefoot, leaving footprints in the foothills. We are footloose and fanny-free in youth. We take footsteps on footpaths, then find ourselves with crow's feet and 1 foot in the grave. This one, I couldn't decide whether to entitle it Return or Relief. Maybe you can advise me when this is over. It's about the Woody and I flew down to Charleston, South Carolina to see the total solar eclipse. Was it last year? I think it was. And it wasn't until we got there. This is something I've never seen before, and I've always wanted to. We got to Charleston, and then I learned that 7 years from then, the total solar eclipse is going to pass right over my house in Rangeley, Maine. So you're all welcome to come then. But we went out in the morning of the eclipse. It was a very iffy day. There were lots of, clouds. Fortunately, at about the time the eclipse began, we saw everything. It was really quite astonishing. But the whole time, there was this bank of dark, dark, thundering storm off to our west. And just watching this eclipse and having that show just on the other side was really kind of overwhelming. Return, relief. The moon lumbered slow and heavy in front of the sun. Thunder to our left, lightning thrashing the distant black clouds, At last, in the eerie green dark, our bare eyes witnessed the black disk rimmed with gold, with fine red lines of fire at the ragged edge of the hole that looked back. And we knew the grand weight of radiance would return like we knew our own hands, yet when the gold sliver finally reappeared, animal relief gushed out of lungs compressed by fear we hadn't known abided there. It was a very primitive reaction. There was this, when the sky is completely as the sun is completely obliterated, it was very strange. So return or relief? Think about it. Seeing the ophthalmologist. We are here to shed light on our condition. My pupils dilate. We are here to brighten the interior of the eye, to map the macula. We are here to enlighten dark spots in the tissue, dimples in the web. We are here to measure the growing cataract, to assess approaching disaster. We are here to arrive at clarity, to inspect the interstitial ashes. Year by year, our charts thicken. The heavy man beside me wheezes, his bulk straining the wicker of his chair. We are here to probe the shadows as we observe flashes of light on the fringe of vision. Here, my chin rests in the frame of the cutting-edge instrument, whose small breeze is a spider kissing my wide-open eye. Skin, the living bag we live in. Unfurred, unfeathered, bare to the air, crusted and weathered by time, by fear, first to parse the grammar of lust or wasting, sack of blood and fluid, when breached will flood or weep, as mother's legs wept. She lay naked, shaved, bedbound, drowning in her body's watery conjugations of the verb to die. She declined in spirit, she swelled in form, betrayed by the welter of assaults on her frame. She called on God to come and get her, great beached weight. She prayed, her dear eyes wrecked, confounded by the grave declensions of earth-bound flesh. And this is my last poem. It's called The Undertaker. I have taken in the past 5-6 years to volunteer digging graves for people in the Prairie Creek Conservation Cemetery. There are a number of such cemeteries springing up all over the country. They are designed to conserve land. If you have a stretch of land with human bodies buried underneath it, it's very difficult to develop it, unless of course you're poor and black, or a slave. So the effort is to conserve land. When you're buried in these cemeteries, there's no embalming. You can be put into the pit with nothing but a winding sheet, if that's what you want. The families take charge of all the arrangements. They have their own ceremonies. It's quite a wonderful thing. I recommend you look into it. I certainly am. The Undertaker. I dug a grave the other day. I helped, 3 others dug as well. The soil was sandy, and the grave lay under the broad shade of an oak. Once the hole grows deep enough, only one shoveler fits in, so the others watch and chat and then take turns. A wood stork flew overhead as I rested. Elegant in flight, of mournful aspect on the ground, we call him the Undertaker. And why, I wonder now, do we name the funeral director the same? Because he literally takes our spent bodies under the ground? Into this cool, quiet place I now prepare for someone else? It smells good, this sandy earth. I think I would happily end my own mortal flight in this space. Then again, the Undertaker brings us all our babies, as we know. Many believe the stork flies human souls to our hereafters. When I lie down in my final field, I hope the genial avian spirit of this Undertaker will accompany me on my journey as crickets sing night after night after night, their eternal million-voiced round. Thank you very much.